I need you to understand something very important before I say another word. What I am about to tell you is not speculation, it is not a theory being debated in university corridors, it is not the kind of story that scientists argue about over coffee while waiting for better data. This is confirmed, verified, cross-referenced data from multiple independent observatories across 3 continents. And it happened 14 hours ago, exactly 14 hours ago, at 4:12 UTC this morning, January 31st, 2026, an object designated 3I/Atlas emerged from behind a stellar mass black hole. It emerged intact, it emerged heavier than when it went in, and it is now broadcasting a signal that no natural object in the history of this universe has ever produced. I am not exaggerating, I am not sensationalizing. I have spent 40 years in astrophysics. I have watched comets burn as they grazed the sun. I have tracked asteroids through the inner solar system. I have sat in rooms where careers were built on careful language, measured conclusions, and the kind of scientific caution that keeps careers safe. And I am telling you, in all those years, nothing has ever forced me to question the fundamental laws of physics the way this morning's data has. The probability of what we observed this morning is not low, it is not unlikely, it is by every framework of physics we possess, impossible, and yet it happened. NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory confirmed the emergence event at 4:12 UTC. ESA's Gaia spacecraft independently tracked the gravitational signature from its orbital position. The Deep Space Network antenna in Canberra, Australia, processed the full telemetry packet and confirmed the mass readings within the hour. 3 independent sources, different methodologies, different equipment, different organizations operating on different continents with different instruments. Identical conclusions. The probability of a solid object surviving transit through the Roche limit of a stellar mass black hole is not low, it is not a matter of degree, it is 0, and yet 3I/Atlas did it. And the question that is keeping every astrophysicist on this planet awake right now, the question that prompted a classified briefing at the White House this morning, is not whether it happened. The question is how. And more importantly, what does it mean that it did? To understand why this morning shattered everything we thought we knew about the universe, we have to go back to December 19, 2025. That is when 3I/Atlas was first confirmed as an interstellar object, approximately 8 astronomical units from Earth, drifting through the Kuiper Belt gap on what appeared to be a standard hyperbolic trajectory. A visitor from deep space passing through our solar system on its way back out to the void. Comets do this, asteroids do this. It is one of the most ordinary events in the calendar of the solar system. Objects come in, objects leave, the sun bends their path slightly, and they disappear back into the darkness between stars. Nobody was alarmed, nobody should have been alarmed. But on December 21st at exactly 14 o'clock UTC, the first anomaly appeared on the tracking data. The object began to decelerate. Now I want you to think carefully about what that means, because this single data point is where the story begins to break from everything we understand. When an object is falling toward a gravitational well, toward the sun, toward Jupiter, toward any massive body, it speeds up. That is not a theory, that is not an approximation, that is gravity doing exactly what gravity has always done since the first moment of the universe. Objects fall inward, they accelerate, they do not slow down unless something is pushing them the other way. But 3I/Atlas slowed down, it dropped its velocity by 3.44 kilometers per second directly against the gravitational pull of Jupiter. Against the pull. Not with it, against it. NASA's Near-Earth Object Observations Program flagged it immediately as a non-gravitational acceleration event. The initial hypothesis, the one that every astrodynamicist reached for within the first hour, was outgassing. Jets of ice and volatile compounds venting into space and acting like crude thrusters. This is standard behavior for comets. We have seen it with Oumuamua when it passed through our system in 2017. We have seen it with Borisov. It is well understood, well documented, and entirely natural. The scientific community, relaxed, outgassing, nothing to worry about. But here is where the story changes permanently. If it were outgassing, we would see the spectral signature, water vapor. Carbon dioxide, dust particles trailing behind the object, like a tail. Any one of those signatures would have confirmed the hypothesis and closed the file. So 3 independent observatories turned their instruments toward 3I/Atlas to find exactly that confirmation. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope targeted the object with its NIRCam instrument from its position at the second Lagrange point. ESA's solar orbiter independently locked onto the same coordinates from a completely different angle in its orbit. The Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile, one of the most sensitive radio telescopes ever built, cross-referenced the emissions in the millimeter wavelength. 3 sources, 3 methodologies, 3 separate teams of scientists working independently, and the conclusion was identical across all 3. There was no gas, there was no dust, there was no coma forming around the object. The space surrounding 3I/Atlas was a perfect vacuum. An object the size of a small city slowed itself down, adjusted its trajectory by a measurable degree, and aligned itself with a specific region of deep space without expelling a single gram of propellant. That defies the rocket equation, that defies Newton's third law of motion, which states that every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. 3I/Atlas acted without any reaction we could detect, without any mechanism we could identify. And by January 15th, as tracking data accumulated and trajectory models were refined, the destination became unmistakable. The object was not heading into empty space. It was heading directly toward a stellar mass black hole, a dark and violent remnant previously uncatalogued, now designated BH Alpha 9, buried deep in the constellation Bootes. And it was heading there with a precision that made engineers at JPL go quiet when they ran the numbers. Now I need to talk about what happens when an object approaches a black hole, because this is where the physics becomes absolute and unforgiving. Every civilization, every species, every intelligence that has ever studied gravity arrives at the same conclusion about black holes. They are death, they are the most violent objects in the universe. When matter gets close enough to a black hole, it crosses a boundary called the Roche limit. Inside that boundary, the difference in gravitational pull between the near side of an object and the far side becomes so extreme that the object is torn apart, stretched, elongated, pulled into a stream of individual atoms. This process has a name, spaghettification, and it is not something that sometimes happens. It is not a risk that can be mitigated with better materials or clever engineering. It is a fundamental and inescapable consequence of general relativity. It happens to stars. It happens to gas clouds, hundreds of times the mass of our sun. It happens to anything that crosses that threshold. The tidal force at the periapsis of 3I/Atlas, the closest point it reached to the singularity of BH Alpha 9, was calculated by JPL at 14 million times the gravitational force at Earth's surface. 14 million Gs. To give you a sense of what that number means, steel begins to tear at roughly 100 Gs. Diamond, the hardest natural material on Earth, shatters well below 1,000. Carbon nanotubes, the strongest material our civilization can theoretically produce at scale, would disintegrate instantly at forces above a few thousand Gs. We are talking about a force that is 14,000 times stronger than anything our best materials can withstand. The probability of any known structure, natural or artificial, surviving 14 million Gs of tidal stress is not small. It is 0, and yet at 4:12 UTC this morning, 3I/Atlas emerged on the other side of that black hole, solid, intact, and 700 million tons heavier than when it went in. The data from ESA's Gaia spacecraft recorded something during that transit that has no precedent in the recorded history of astronomy. At the exact moment of closest approach, when the tidal forces should have been at their absolute maximum, the gravitational readings in the immediate vicinity of the object inverted. Instead of being pulled inward toward the singularity, the space-time immediately surrounding 3I/Atlas pushed outward. A localized repulsive gravity field was detected. In the language of general relativity, this is called a region of negative energy density, a bubble where the curvature of space-time reverses its normal behavior. In general relativity, creating such a field requires what physicists call exotic matter, matter with negative mass. We have seen this concept in mathematical equations for decades. It appears in solutions to Einstein's field equations. Theoretical physicists have written papers about it. But we have never, not once in the history of observational science, detected it in nature. It has never been measured. It has never been confirmed to exist outside of a theoretical framework. But the telemetry from this morning is unambiguous. For exactly 18 seconds, 3I/Atlas generated a metric tensor field that cancelled the gravitational pull of BH alpha 9 in its immediate vicinity. It created a pocket of calm inside the most violent gravitational storm in that region of space. It did not survive the tidal forces by being stronger than them. It survived by switching them off. Think about what that sentence means. Think about the implications of an object that can manipulate the curvature of spacetime itself. We are not talking about reflecting a signal or deflecting radiation. We are talking about an object that reached into the fabric of the universe and rewrote the rules of gravity in its immediate vicinity for 18 seconds. If this capability is natural, if some unknown astrophysical process produced it, then we have to discard over a century of physics built on the assumption that spacetime curvature is produced only by mass and energy. Every textbook since Einstein published general relativity in 1915 would need to be rewritten. But if this capability is not natural, if it was engineered, then the distance between our civilization and whatever built this object is comparable to the distance between a single-celled organism and a species capable of building particle accelerators. We are talking about what physicists call a Type II civilization on the Kardashev scale, a species that has mastered the energy output of an entire star. And the data suggests that 3I/Atlas did not merely survive the black hole encounter through luck or through some fortunate alignment of natural forces. It used BH alpha 9. It exploited it deliberately, the precision of the trajectory, the timing of the negative gravity field, the harvesting of the accretion disk. Each step followed the previous one with a logic that has no natural analog. Let me walk you through the statistical cascade, because each individual impossibility here is staggering on its own. But when you begin to multiply them together, the numbers become something beyond human comprehension. First, the survival itself. The probability of any object of standard comet density surviving transit through the Roche limit of a stellar mass black hole is effectively zero. But for the purpose of calculation, let us assign it a generous number based on known material science and the most optimistic assumptions about unknown natural processes. 1 in 10 billion. Now add the second impossibility. The trajectory precision required to enter the ergosphere, the region where spacetime is dragged around the black hole at the speed of light, through a specific entry corridor that keeps the object safe from immediate destruction. The margin of error, 3I/Atlas, achieved was less than 0.00004 degrees. If it had been off by 0.01 degrees to one side, it would have missed the corridor entirely and drifted into the void. If it had been off by 0.01 degrees to the other side, it would have crossed a point of no return and been crushed into the singularity. The probability of hitting that corridor by chance, with no guidance system, no propulsion, no correction mechanism of any kind, is approximately 1 in 4.7 billion. Now multiply those two numbers, 1 in 10 billion times 1 in 4.7 billion. You arrive at a combined probability of roughly 1 in 47 quintillion. That is a 1 followed by 19 zeros. To place that number in context, you would have better odds of flipping a fair coin and getting heads 63 times in a row than you would of both of these events occurring together through pure coincidence. And we are not finished with the cascade. The third impossibility is the deceleration event in December, an object reducing its velocity against gravitational pull without any detectable exhaust, any energy expenditure, any mechanism whatsoever. If we assign that a generous probability of 1 in a trillion, our combined number becomes 1 in 47 times 10 to the 31st power. 1 in 47,000 million. You would have better odds of selecting one specific atom from every atom currently present in the Earth and doing it correctly twice in a row. Each of these events, taken in isolation, would end a scientific career if someone proposed them as natural phenomena without extraordinary evidence. Together, they form a chain of impossibilities, so dense and so interlocking that the mathematics itself is pointing us toward a conclusion that most scientists are not yet prepared to state publicly. And then there is the energy. Because when 3I/Atlas emerged from behind BH alpha 9, it was fundamentally different from the object that went in. Before the encounter, its calculated mass was 4.2 billion tons. After the encounter, gravitational lensing data confirmed a mass of 4.9 billion tons. It gained 700 million tons of matter in 18 seconds. To understand what that number means, consider this. 700 million tons is roughly the mass of every building in the city of New York, multiplied by 10, added to a single object, in less time than it takes to tie your shoes. Where did that mass come from? The Event Horizon Telescope Network, the same collaborative array of radio telescopes that gave humanity its first direct image of a black hole, tracked a distortion in the accretion disk of BH alpha 9 during the transit event. Matter from the disk, superheated plasma, spinning at 30% the speed of light, was not falling into the singularity as physics demands it should. It was being diverted, redirected, channeled directly into 3I/Atlas. The energy transfer rate measured during that 18-second window was approximately 3.8 times 10 to the 26th joules per second. That is roughly equivalent to the total energy output of our sun absorbed in 1 second. And the object did not explode. It did not radiate heat. It did not glow. It absorbed a star's worth of energy and went cold. The surface temperature of 3I/Atlas during the transit dropped to 0.4 Kelvin, near absolute zero. It went stealth. NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory detected what appeared to be a dampening field around the object. The background X-ray noise from the black hole's accretion disk, the constant high-energy scream that surrounds any active singularity, suddenly dipped in the vicinity of 3I/Atlas. It was as if the object was consuming the radiation before it could propagate outward. At 23 o'clock UTC the previous night, just before 3I/Atlas disappeared behind the event horizon shadow, its albedo changed. It stopped reflecting light entirely. It became what physicists call a perfect black body. For 6 hours, the monitors at JPL went flat. The signal disappeared. The assumption, the logical and scientifically defensible assumption, was destruction. We assumed the tidal forces had finally won. We assumed the object had been ripped into a stream of subatomic particles and added to the black hole's mass. That is what should have happened. That is what the physics demanded. But the numbers do not lie. And what appeared on the sensors at 4:12 UTC this morning has no precedent. We build lead walls to stop X-rays. We have engineered materials that reflect certain wavelengths. We do not have nothing in our entire catalog of known materials that absorbs high-energy gamma rays and X-rays and converts them silently into mass. And yet the data from this morning shows exactly that process occurring. This violates the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy should have increased. Disorder should have grown. The universe trends toward chaos, not toward the assembly of stable exotic elements from raw plasma. And yet spectroscopic analysis of the new material on the surface of 3I/Atlas detected super-heavy elements with atomic numbers ranging from 120 to 126. Elements near what physicists call the island of stability on the periodic table. These elements do not exist in nature in stable form. Under normal conditions they decay in milliseconds. They can only be forged inside a supernova or inside a particle accelerator with an energy budget comparable to a small star. And yet 3I/Atlas is covered in them. Stable, solid, present. The object did not simply consume plasma, it transmuted raw hydrogen and helium into hyper-dense exotic armor. The physics does not permit this, and yet it exists. Now I need to talk about what happened after the emergence, because everything I have described so far was documented by the end of January 30th. The survival, the mass gain, the exotic elements, the negative gravity bubble, all confirmed, all verified, all impossible. But at 6:30 UTC this morning, the Parkes Observatory in New South Wales, Australia, detected something that transformed this event from an impossible physics anomaly into something else entirely. A coherent radio burst from 3I/Atlas. Not continuous transmission, not random noise. A structured pulse pattern, 3 pulses, a pause, 1 pulse, a pause, 4 pulses, a pause, 1 pulse, a pause, 5 pulses, a pause, 9 pulses. I want you to sit with that sequence for a moment before I continue. 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, the first digits of pi, the mathematical constant that describes the ratio between a circle's circumference and its diameter. It is irrational. It extends infinitely without ever repeating. It is one of the most fundamental numbers in all of mathematics, and 3i/Atlas was broadcasting it, not just the first few digits. The full signal, as processed by the Deep Space Network over the following hours, contained pi to 400 decimal places on a repeating loop, transmitted on a frequency of 1420 MHz. The hydrogen line, the exact frequency that physicists and SETI researchers have proposed for decades as the natural choice for interstellar communication, precisely because hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and any civilization with basic radio technology would recognize its spectral signature. A rock does not know pi. A comet does not transmit mathematical constants. A natural phenomenon does not broadcast irrational numbers on the one frequency in the universe specifically identified as a universal contact channel. This is not noise. This is not interference from a terrestrial source. This is structured, intentional, mathematically precise communication, and within 30 minutes of that detection being confirmed, NASA went silent. The public data feed for the Deep Space Network was taken offline without explanation. The live telemetry page for 3i/Atlas on JPL's website was replaced with a generic system maintenance banner. I have colleagues, people I have worked alongside for decades in this field, who had full access to the data stream as recently as yesterday morning. I made calls this morning. 2 of them did not answer. The third told me, in a voice I have not heard from him before, that his credentials had been suspended at 7 o'clock UTC. No explanation provided, no timeline for restoration. Access simply terminated. In 50 years of space exploration, a sudden blackout during a critical discovery event has happened before. It happened during the WOW signal detection in 1977, when the Big Ear telescope in Ohio picked up a 30-second burst of radio waves that matched every theoretical prediction for an interstellar transmission. It happened during the Oumuamua debate, when data access became politically complicated. And it is happening right now. Ask yourself why. What would prompt an institution like NASA, an organization that has spent decades building its public reputation on transparency, open data, and scientific engagement, to go completely dark during what should be the single most significant astronomical event in the history of human civilization? Something in that classified data has prompted action at levels that go beyond scientific oversight. Something has frightened people who are not accustomed to being frightened. Emergency sessions were convened simultaneously at NASA headquarters and the European Space Agency within the same hour that the pi signal was confirmed. Budget reallocations for priority tracking were initiated before the afternoon. Military assets have been repositioned. Exclusion zones have been established around certain ground-based observatories, including facilities in Chile and Australia. Armed personnel have been reported at the perimeter of at least 2 observatories that were actively tracking 3i/Atlas at the time the blackout was initiated. Clearance revocations were issued across multiple agencies. I verified this myself. In my 4 decades of working in this field, I have never seen a government respond to an astronomical event with this speed or this level of force. We do not deploy military personnel to track comets. We do not establish armed exclusion zones around telescopes. We do not classify telemetry data from objects that are simply passing through our solar system. Something in that data, something in what was observed during or immediately after the emergence event, has convinced people at the highest levels of authority that this situation demands more than a press release and a scheduled press conference. The British government issued a statement this morning that used language I have not seen in a scientific context before. They are not treating 3i/Atlas as an astronomical curiosity. They are treating it as a priority event requiring coordinated international response. And the situation is still developing. 12 hours ago, the signal changed. The pi broadcast did not stop. It continues on the hydrogen line, repeating without interruption. But underneath it, a secondary transmission layer was detected by the Deep Space Network antenna in Madrid, a frequency modulation pattern that analysts are still working to decode. The object's spin rate has stabilized completely. The tumbling motion that characterized its travel for weeks has stopped. It is no longer behaving like a passive object drifting through space. The radar cross-section data suggests the physical structure has changed since the emergence. Before the black hole encounter, 3i/Atlas presented as a cylinder, roughly 400 meters in length. The post-emergence radar returns indicate new geometry, symmetrical protrusions along the central axis, extensions that were not present before. The radar signature has shifted from a tumbling irregular body to a stabilized, structured platform. We do not yet have optical imagery at sufficient resolution to see the details. But the data is clear that the shape has changed, and the new trajectory, is the piece of data that, according to sources familiar with the White House briefing, prompted the most urgent response. 3I/Atlas is no longer on an escape hyperbolic path. It has entered a capture orbit. It is coming back. The new vector, calculated using the Doppler shift embedded in the pi signal, places its perihelion, its closest approach to our Sun, inside the orbit of Mars. It is heading for the inner solar system. Right now, as you watch this, the Very Large Telescope in Chile is tracking the updated coordinates. Every hour, it moves 200,000 kilometers closer to Earth. In 36 hours, it will cross the orbit of Jupiter. So where does this leave us? There are 3 scenarios that the current data supports, only 3, and each one of them changes the entire framework through which we understand humanity's place in the cosmos. The first scenario is that 3I/Atlas is a remnant, evidence of a prehistoric civilization, one that existed either on this planet or within this solar system, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years before the first human civilization recorded a single word, a species capable of manipulating space-time, of forging exotic elements, of constructing objects designed to survive the most violent environments in the galaxy, to civilization that rose, that built, that achieved things we cannot yet imagine, and that disappeared. Left nothing behind but this object, drifting through interstellar space, dormant, patient, for longer than recorded human history can measure. If this scenario is correct, then we are not the first intelligent species to have existed in this solar system. We are the second, or the third, or the 10th. The second scenario is that 3I/Atlas is infrastructure. Not a ship in the sense we imagine, not a vessel carrying passengers or cargo, but a component, a node in a larger system, built by an intelligence operating on timescales and distances that are difficult for the human mind to grasp. A harvester designed to refuel itself at black holes and continue operating indefinitely. A relay station positioned along a route between 2 points we have not yet identified. Something that was constructed long before our Sun ignited and that has been performing its function ever since, unaware of or indifferent to the small civilization that has developed on one small planet in one unremarkable corner of one arm of one galaxy. The third scenario is the one that prompted the classified briefing. 3I/Atlas is not a relic. It is not dormant, it is not a piece of forgotten infrastructure. It is active, it survived a black hole, it refueled, it restructured itself, it began transmitting, and it turned around, it changed course. It is coming back toward us with clear and deliberate purpose. One of these 3 scenarios is our reality. There is no middle ground. The data does not support a fourth option. The physics does not permit a natural explanation. The clock is running. The signal is repeating. The object is closer every hour. The telescopes are pointed, and the detectors are live. And whatever conversation this is the beginning of, Earth is now listening,